transforming greed and anger into the path in two parts, transforming situations of anger into the path, transforming situations of greed into the path, transforming situations of anger into the path. If the inner enemy of anger has not been subdued, subduing external enemies will only make them stronger. Therefore, with the army of loving kindness and compassion, subdue your own mind. This is the practice of a bodhisattva. Among all enemies, the most difficult to subdue is none other than the fierce enemy of anger and other afflictions within the continuum of our own mind. All of our efforts to subdue other enemies are relatively easy. But as for anger, some people have a very, very strong tendency towards anger indeed, while others are not so prone to anger. If one has a strong anger, then once anger arises, it is truly difficult to deal with. If we can subdue them, that is to say these afflictions such as anger and hatred, then just as when a fire is completely extinguished, there will be no more smoke rising from it. If there is no fire, there will be no smoke. All the external enemies and demons will naturally disappear without a trace. Actually, just as it is explained in the words of my perfect teacher, they are all reflections of our own mind. If we do not subdue these afflictions, then no matter how much we try to subdue external enemies who harm us, we will never be able to exhaust them. On the contrary, they will only increase. It's like how Putin wants in a very short time to take over Ukraine. But in the end, even such a relatively small nation like Ukraine, so many different countries around the world ended up actively supporting it. Some nations generously provided essential weapons and vital military aid. Some sent troops, some offered other kinds of support, and so on. If at the very beginning he had generated a mind of compassion, recited the Avalokiteshvara mantra, instead of shouting Ura. Ura is just an exclamation they use to boost their courage, a meaningless word, a kind of slogan. Just like when we say Alala, which means how rare, or Aho, Lajaro, and so on. These are all examples of expressive phrases. It really all comes down to one's own mind. If you don't tame your mind, the more you fight, the more enemies you have. Didn't Ben Gangjial once say, "Now that I've become a monk, I don't have a single enemy left. But when I was a layperson, I carried several knives of all sizes on me and had a lot of Tibetan knives. I had countless enemies. This is simply the inherent law of nature of the world. Therefore, we should cultivate a loving kindness that wishes all enemies and loved ones alike to be endowed with happiness, and also a great compassion that wishes them to be free from suffering. This vast army of loving kindness and compassion and so on are methods of suppression or even eradication. We use our loving kindness and compassion to suppress, which is actually possible, but to truly eradicate, it may require non-dual wisdom. Otherwise, just relying on loving kindness and compassion alone, according to the view of the Pramanavartika, eradication is somewhat difficult. If we have compassion, we can suppress it. Yesterday we talked about great pressure and great suppression. That's what suppression means. The previous one can also be changed to suppression to subdue the afflictions within our own mental continuum. This is what all bodhisattvas do, turning the object of anger into a means for the path. This is stated in the way of the bodhisattva. Fools are as limitless as space. How could one possibly subdue them all? If you quell this anger, it is the same as destroying all enemies. Stubborn people are as vast as space, pervading the entire world. If I want to subdue them one by one, to subdue every single person who opposes me, to subdue every person dissatisfied with me one by one, to eliminate them one by one, it would be very difficult. But if I can extinguish my own anger, in reality, that is the same as destroying all enemies. We as worldly people may think that we need to be strong. If we are not strong enough ourselves, we become weaker and weaker, and others will bully us more and more. So this is a worldly perspective. And in opening the door to mind training, it is also discussed that this is actually a particularly foolish way of thinking that you must overpower others and always be forceful, and that if you are not forceful, others will bully you. This kind of thinking is addressed in the 7 points of mind training, as well as in opening the door to mind training. This is the language of someone who knows nothing about Mahayana Buddhism, the words of a fool. Indeed, people in the world often talk like this. Sometimes there are such situations where it seems that when a person is especially weak, People of all kinds and sizes will bully you. But in fact, if you contemplate compassion, it is not a sign of weakness. It is actually the greatest manifestation in spiritual practice. These two should not be confused with each other. If you do confuse them, it shows that you, from a worldly perspective, there is indeed such a saying. Especially among Westerners, Westerners always feel the need to appear strong. If you don't appear strong, you'll be bullied next time. But in Mahayana Buddhism, this kind of statement and way of thinking is considered to be extremely foolish and unwise. It is a view that goes against Mahayana Buddhist teachings. What is meant here is that if you have not subdued the enemy within your own mind stream, then no matter how many external enemies you defeat, you can never finish them all. It also says, why would you need enough leather to cover the entire earth? A single piece of leather as a shoe sole is the same as covering the whole earth. We often use this analogy. If you try to use a huge piece of leather to cover the entire earth, that's unrealistic. But if you have a shoe insole, if your shoe soles are well made, then no matter which thorny forest you walk into, your feet won't get hurt. If you cultivate patience yourself, even among the most unruly groups, nothing will happen to you. But if your mind hasn't developed patience, even if just 2 or 3 people go out together and spend a night in the same hotel room, by the next morning they're sure to end up fighting, or at least feeling uncomfortable. So for those who don't practice patience, or those who fail to cultivate patience, life in this world is very difficult. This means that if you can subdue the continuum of your own mind, it's equivalent to having subdued all your enemies. In the 100 Verses treatise, it also says, even if you destroy your enemies, there will be no end to them. But if you eliminate your own anger, then all enemies are eliminated. This meaning is the same as what was mentioned earlier. The Treasury of Good Sayings treatise, not the wish-fulfilling Treasury of Good Sayings treatise. In the Treasury of Good Sayings treatise, you should omit the words wish-fulfilling. The Treasury of Good Sayings treatise also contains such teachings. This is also a book of mind training instructions. I'm not sure who the author is. I'll check on that later. Although there are many methods for taming the mind. Just now, didn't we use the army of loving kindness and compassion to subdue it? In that case, the faults of anger were not discussed here. The main approach is to subdue it with compassion. As for methods to tame the mind, contemplating emptiness, cultivating bodhicitta, or reciting the Bodhisattva mantra and so on, there are all sorts of methods for taming the mind. But what is being taught here is compassion. Compassion is the foundation of the Mahayana path and bodhicitta. But cultivating compassion is truly difficult. Actually, we really need to set aside some time specifically to practice it. Today, some of the male students here made offerings to me, saying that they are going to practice the 3 places, 3 good guidance text a certain number of times. That's quite good. Their practice is actually pretty decent. But if we look at the stability of the mind, especially compassion, we really need to cultivate compassion a bit more. Some people practice regularly, and in that case, the mind does change. If the mind doesn't change, then no matter what else you do, it's actually not very useful. I hope that for many of us, whether it's in practice or in study and contemplation, we can see whether our own mind has changed even a little. Change, do you understand these 2 words, change? After you hear a teaching, does it move your mind? If you are moved, and then in real life there is even a slight change. For example, if you used to have a lot of anger, now you have the ability to restrain your anger. If before you didn't have any compassion for sentient beings at all, but now it seems that you truly have developed a bit of compassion for sentient beings. That is a kind of change. If there is no change, then whether you are someone on the Dharma seat, the Kenpo or Kenmo teaching the Dharma, or someone who often listens to teachings, it doesn't really have much meaning. If our minds truly undergo a complete transformation, then our future practice will be very steady and reliable. Among some of us, there really are people whose practice is very stable. Back when I first started, around 1991, I went to Myanmar. There was an elderly lay practitioner in Myanmar, whom many of our old Dharma friends knew. He had a very stable mind. Before His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok, he received Vajrasattva empowerment. Later, he recited the Vajrasattva mantra 100 million times. He hand-copied hundreds of Diamond Sutra volumes. Every day he would read it once. Then he said that now he is reciting the Guru Rinpoche mantra, and he has vowed to recite it 100 million times. He has already completed 70 million. He wonders if, in the rest of his life, he can reach 100 million. There are still more than 20 million to go. He is already well into his 80s, When I first went to his home, we established what we called a Vajradharma Center. At that time, it was called the Vajradharma Center. Before that, when I went to places like Hong Kong, there were Vajradharma centers there, so I was very envious. So we started building one there. For more than 30 years, it has never been interrupted. Actually, for us practitioners, sometimes having a stable mind is very important. Then when the mind changes, no matter which teacher you encounter, your behavior changes completely. For example, some people here, whether lay practitioners or monastics, some used to eat a lot of meat in the past, but later, truly relying on a certain cause and condition, they immediately stopped eating meat and stopped killing living beings, or stopped engaging in sexual misconduct, or even truly became monastics. In this way, the mind has completely changed. The power of such a mind is indeed very great. If you don't have this kind of mind, on the surface you just listen every day, dozing off and eating while listening. And tomorrow will be just the same. Sometimes you sleep for a bit, sometimes you listen for a bit, drifting in and out, just muddling through like this. Time will still pass as usual, but your mind stream won't really change at all. So when you encounter these teachings, for example, in my life, I want to cultivate compassion, and below we have some stories of great masters, Langri Tangpa and Geshe Chekawa. The two of them are quite interesting. So those great masters of the past truly, once the teacher gave a teaching, even just one class could completely transform them. But for some of us, even after listening to thousands of teachings, your mind is still the same. It might even be getting worse and worse, becoming more negative. At first, you might have had faith in the 3 jewels, but gradually that faith fades away. No matter what this means, your practice is not successful. There's really nothing to sugarcoat about this. Here it says that compassion is the foundation of the Mahayana path and bodhicitta. This is stated in the ornament of the Mahayana Sutras. It says its root is compassion. The root of the Mahayana is compassion. Compassion moistens loving kindness. When compassion nourishes, this is called loving kindness. In the Jewel Garland, it says first, great compassion. For all practices, one must have compassion, especially for those who enter the Mahayana Buddhist path. At the beginning of entering the middle way, it says, compassion for the vast fruit of Buddhahood is like a seed at the beginning and like water in the middle stage. When discussing compassion at the beginning, middle, and end, when talking about these 3 stages' importance, explained in this way. In addition, Atisha the Venerable also said, if the mind is gentle and pliant, external enemies cannot harm you. The Venerable also said, if one lacks compassion, one cannot be called a bodhisattva. Here we are talking about bodhisattvas who have generated bodhicitta. Today, having been born into the Tathagata's lineage, you have become a bodhisattva. But if you do not have even a trace of compassion, then regardless of whether it is the title of a bodhisattva in terms of view, or the title of a bodhisattva, you cannot be called one. The Venerable said that a bodhisattva unable to cultivate compassion probably exists only in Tibet. But now it seems that there are many outside of Tibet as well. Because at that time transportation was inconvenient, Venerable Atisha, apart from Tibet, had not been to other places either. If you were to go to Han region or to Africa, you would see that not only Tibet is actually considered quite good. So how should one practice? First, it is necessary to study and practice step by step and then act accordingly. Venerable Dromtonpa also said, if one does not part from loving kindness, compassion and bodhicitta, it is impossible to be reborn in the 3 lower realms. From now on, such a person is called a non-retrogressing one. If we now possess loving kindness, compassion and bodhicitta, we will not fall into the lower realms either. From this moment on, such a person is called a non-retrogressing one, because they do not fall into lower states. How was this explained in the Compendium of Knowledge the other day? It seems this was also mentioned there. Then Geshe Potowa said, with the deluded thoughts of discriminating between enemies and friends, one cannot attain Buddhahood. If we harbor such discriminating thoughts of enemies and friends, such deluded thoughts, then it may be impossible to achieve realization. Therefore, we must develop compassion toward all beings. We must develop compassion without bias. But this is very difficult, it truly is. When it comes to loved ones, after all, they are my loved ones, my disciples, my teachers, and so on. And then there are others. Oh, these are people who don't get along with me, who treat me in various ways. We still can't treat everyone equally. Once we reach that point, attaining Buddhahood is not far off. Geshe Karawa also taught that all beings in the three realms who have been our parents in the past and are full of kindness, we should abandon any intention to harm them and cultivate compassion instead. When Geshe Gunawa was explaining the many reasons for the importance of compassion, Venerable Langri Tangpa prostrated and offered this statement. At that time, Geshe Gunawa was probably talking a lot about the importance of compassion, and while he was speaking, Langri Tangpa became a bit emotional and began to, just like how some people among us nowadays, as they speak they suddenly cry, or as they speak they immediately prostrate, or as they speak things like this happen. So at that moment, Langri Tangpa couldn't hold back anymore. He immediately began to prostrate while saying this. From now on, I will only cultivate compassion. See, I think that in the past, those great masters, if they gave just one teaching, it could completely transform someone right then and there. When Gunawa taught Langri Tangpa, why did Langri Tangpa become so remarkable? He had something in his heart. If there was nothing in his heart, then what he said would also be dry and empty without much substance. But if he truly had something in his heart, then as he spoke, his words would be gentle and nourishing. Whether it's the blessing or realization or whatever it may be, there's a real difference in the way such words are spoken. Whether or not it's moving or inspiring mainly depends on whether the speaker has realization and they have compassion. So when Geshe Jinewa was teaching at that time, Langri Tangpa said, "From now on I will practice compassion every single day. That's the only thing. I will focus solely on that." Perhaps from that moment on, Langri Tangpa continuously practiced only compassion and bodhicitta. Geshe Jinewa took off his hat, placed his palms together on his crown and said, "This couldn't be any better." You see, the two of them were quite delightful. The teacher taught very successfully, and the disciple also made a vow, "From now on, I will practice compassion alone." As for Geshe Jinewa's words, in traditional Tibetan Buddhism, when giving teachings in the past, it was common to wear a kenpo hat. This was the usual practice during teachings. Then they would take off their hat, which is considered the most respectful gesture. When a teacher removes his hat and places his palms together for a disciple, it means, "Oh, this is the best, I want to pay homage to you. You should diligently cultivate compassion and bodhicitta from now on." 3 Dharma brothers and a disciple of Karongpa once visited Venerable Jodumpa, and the Venerable asked, "What is Potowa doing?" He answered truthfully. Finally, he asked again, "What is Karongpa doing?" The disciple replied, "He has been covering his head and crying every day beside an anthill." Then the Venerable also removed his hat, placed his palms together, and tears streamed down his face. He said, "How rare, how rare." He offered the highest praise for Venerable Karongpa's practice of compassion. Everyone should remember this, right? In the words of my perfect teacher, it says, "What is Potowa doing?" He asked his 3 Dharma brothers. One was Potowa, one was Puchungwa, and one was Gunbawa. He asked her, "What is Potowa doing?" "Oh, Potowa, among thousands of disciples, teaches the Dharma every day." Jodumpa said, "Good, good, good. This is also very rare. This is also the true Dharma. Very good." Then he asked, "What is Puchungwa doing?" "Puchungwa goes out every day to beg for alms, build stupas, compiles scriptures, and makes Buddha statues. Every day he works on the supports of the 3 jewels." Then he said, "Oh, this is also very good. This is also a form of practice." Then he asked, "Well, what is Gunbawa doing?" Gunbawa began to go into retreat and observe silence, meditating every day. "Oh, this is also very good." It seems that later Jodumpa responded the same way to each of them. He praised them, not with high praise. "What is Kalongba doing?" No one knew what Kalongba did. It seemed like he wasn't doing anything in particular. Every day he would go to the anthill, cover his head with his shawl and cry. Jodumpa was especially moved by this. Wow, he is truly practicing, cultivating compassion. Because when it comes to cultivating compassion, truly, whether it's giving teachings or practicing, serving as a support for the 3 jewels, making Buddha statues every day, building temples, these are also virtuous deeds, in fact. But the most important thing is whether you can cultivate compassion and bodhicitta for every sentient being. If that's the case, then among all Mahayana practices, this is the most important. So he also took off his hat as a sign of respect. Actually, taking off one's hat was also a custom in ancient China. When meeting certain distinguished people, as a very polite gesture, one would remove their hat and place it over their chest. It seems Europeans have a similar custom as well when distinguished people interact with each other. It's still like this nowadays, isn't it? Generally, if lay people have faith in monastics, they will take off their hats as soon as they see a monastic. But if they don't really have much faith, when they see a monastic, they insist on putting their hat back on. There are such cases. Some people do this on purpose. Sometimes we see all sorts of situations like this, including some officials. When they see monastics, they make a point of putting on a hat, lighting a cigarette, and acting nonchalant. But actually, that's not really a problem. It's fine to do that too. However, if someone does it deliberately, sometimes you have to wonder if it's really necessary. It just feels like there are all kinds of situations. That's how it is with Kalongba. If one can truly give rise to a genuine, uncontrived compassion, then it proves that one has truly achieved the exchange of self and others' suffering and happiness, and can even work for the benefit of others without regard for one's own life. This is extremely important. In addition, Bodhisattva Tokme Sangpo himself also said this. One should eliminate the mind that harbors hatred toward enemies. If you do not subdue your own anger, then there will be no end to the external enemies you must destroy. But if you have subdued your own anger, then there is no need to destroy enemies. It is also said, if one does not have the mind to liberate all sentient beings under heaven, if you lack such a mind to liberate all beings, then you cannot attain the fruit of perfect enlightenment. Therefore, one should cultivate great compassion, and he also practiced this personally in his own actions, okay?
Jupun Solen Bandara Badma Sodargye Bandara Badma Sodargye Bandara Badma Sodargye